let us grab that magical hats episode, and then we will continue after I have had my lunch. Hold up. We need to do some nice React Andying while I have my food. Hold up. And then we will continue some actual testing. Like, I'm not gonna... Yeah. I'm not gonna jump into another DB ranked game, I promise. I've learned my lesson. Alright, the topic is, do floodgates have a place in Yugioh? Okay.
App card, the magical hats. In this series, myself and 3 of the top Yu-Gi-Oh streamers will give their unfiltered, uncensored, and uninformed takes on some of Yu-Gi-Oh's most pressing issues. The catch? One of these 4 has a fake take, and it's up to the rest to find the liar. It's time to play Magical Hats.
Yes.
Well, folks, it's time for another episode of your favorite show. No, not Progression Series, not Progression Playoff.
It's so hard this time. I wonder, because I feel like you'd think that anyone having the opinion that floodgates are okay would be the imposter, right? But then on the other hand, I actually have a take on floodgates that might surprise some of you. I hate floodgates, but my answer to the questions, do floodgates have a place in Yu-Gi-Oh, is actually not a strict no. Like, I would prefer floodgates to not exist, me personally, but... And this is something that has changed a little bit since I started content creation, because ever since I started content creation, which is, by the way, it's like over a year now. I've missed the anniversary at some point, but ever since I've been starting to do content creation, I've gotten in touch with a lot of people that view the game from a different perspective than myself. Because before then, I've always only been basically in the position of the competitive player, right? The super competitive player, and I'd also say like the good competitive player, right? And from that perspective, floodgates are unfun. Floodgates take away games from good players that they should probably win against players that aren't as good, right? That definitely happens. So like, from that perspective, I don't like floodgates. But there's also other perspectives where casual players, as much as it sucks, right? As much as it sucks to say that, is like casual players need them to win sometimes. Because it is not reasonable for a casual player to ever beat a good player at Yu-Gi-Oh! If they don't have that, right? Because it is unreasonable at this point in time with how complex Yu-Gi-Oh! Has become and with how many different decks you need to know, with how many cards you need to be familiar with for casual players to ever have a chance at beating a better player with without floodgates. Now, you could also argue that they shouldn't be beating good players, right? They probably shouldn't. I mean, that you could argue that's a good thing, but I think that if you look at the game as a whole, right? You want the worst player to beat the better player sometimes. From a marketing standpoint, from a community standpoint, if you want the game to grow, you need to let worse players have their fun as well. You know what I mean? Like, it's and once again, from my perspective, I wouldn't like that. I don't like floodgates to exist, but I understand why. I understand why from certain standpoints they can be not the worst thing in the world. How did chess ever survive then? Well, but we're not playing chess. That's the thing. People are always like, oh, I want to play. Like, if you want a game like that, you have to go to chess. You're not looking into a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! Where the game changes over time and like whatnot. Overall, don't get me wrong. Please don't get me wrong. I would still say floodgates should go. I would still very much prefer it. I hate it. I understand where other people are coming from better now. That's all I'm saying. And I think that's like, you know, that's something that people should also take into account sometimes when forming their opinions.
And definitely not Junior Journey. I'm talking about magical hats. I'm here once again. I got Gage. I got Kevin. I got Nadir. How are y'all doing?
Doing good. Doing good.
Average. It's fight night.
So today we are going to be fighting because the topic is Floodgates. Do you think floodgates are necessary in Yu-Gi-Oh? Do you think they're good, bad? I think it's just floodgates with a big question mark. So, Kevin, you want to go first?
Okay, so the prompt that we got was, do floodgates have a place in Yu-Gi-Oh? So I will just come out and say it. I absolutely despise floodgates. I hate them. They're annoying to play against. They're not fun. But I do think that they have a place in Yu-Gi-Oh, and the place in Yu-Gi-Oh that they have is helping not very good or not as good players win sometimes against better players. And what I mean by this is, I think that as a company trying to design a card game that tries to be as inclusive as it can,
That's literally what I just said.
and to have as many
And they are
players
looking at him like it's a sus take, which is like, yeah, I think that is not an unreasonable
There are
take.
a lot of players that will probably end up getting very frustrated at the game if the game is 100% skillful all the time, specifically to help less good players bridge that gap between what makes them not as good as the better players that are maybe attending their locals or other sorts of events.
That's wild.
Can we just end the episode now? There's just no way you can do that.
Take. What?
Oh my god. Nadir, you want to, I guess, drag this out till we get ad revenue?
What the fuck?
So I gotta circle back to that in a moment, but I'll just give my blanket take here, and that's I actually made like a whole ass lecture on this once upon a time. I think that overall fun is a very subjective term, but I think that it can have some objective measurements. Generally what I find is that, and basically TLDR, what I boil this down to, is that interactivity equals fun. The more you're going back and forward with your opponent, the more you're trading resources, managing your cards, and trying to outscale your opponent, that is what I think should probably be the best way to describe fun in an objective sense.
Also a
Floodgates
good take.
remove that interactivity, and you are unable to deal with your opponent. But I will say that I understand this carrot on the stick argument that Kevin tried to touch on there, which is that you need to be able to just have some kind of a chance
Honestly,
when playing. And
I think it's fine to disagree with Coder. What I think is not fine is reacting to it like Gage did, where like that take is so wild. No, it's not. Of course, it's a reasonable take to say, well, floodgates help not so good players to win sometimes. You know? How is that a bad take? That is obviously a correct take. Of course, that's true. Of course, floodgates help bad players win sometimes. And now the only question is, do you think, like, do you accept that, right? Do you think it's fine to let worse players win sometimes? Or are you like, nah, the better player should always win. We always need to have interaction as much as possible so that the better player can always win, which is like, from the perspective of the better player, yes. But from other perspectives, not as much. And are floodgates fun? No. And Kevin said that. Kevin said he doesn't like floodgates. He doesn't think they are fun, but they help the worst players and the casual players win from time to time. And that's maybe a good thing in terms of getting people into the game and keeping them there, you know, in their beginning weeks or months or years even. And how can you call that an unreasonable take? I don't think it is.
newer players can have that because if they win sometimes, then they get that chance via the ability to floodgate out their opponent. There are some overtly egregious examples of floodgates, and there are some that are less so. Depending on the deck, sometimes you can kind of play around Gozen or Rivalry and stuff like that, but there are really, really bad ones. Skill Drain, Soul Drain in a graveyard deck, Mystic Mine, Necro Valley, these things can completely shut down whole strategies, but it really just depends on your deck.
It is Nadir's reading voice, by the way. He is reading this.
Overall, I would say floodgates do not have a place in the game because they do not create fun. But I do kind of understand the carrot on the stick argument that Kevin made. So overall, I guess if I had to choose good or bad, absolutely negative and really bad for the game.
Are you reading a script?
No?
You can write these out.
I'm just really well spoken when I sit and think, Kevin. I know it might be surprising.
It's like, holy shit, like I was like, dude, this
he
sounds
read that.
smart. Where did this come from?
This is my out of character.
You wouldn't know if you turned on a stream.
Yeah, no, this is my non-Twitch stream thinking.
Ah, got you.
Yeah,
He read that.
I'll go next. As you all know, I was a pretty big defender of floodgates maybe like 2.5 years ago. I was like getting in the trenches every day against, you know, basically exactly Farfa online about how it's frustrating that, you know, in Magic the Gathering, there's not this huge animosity toward stun decks that there is in Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's unbelievable that for some reason it's unacceptable for Yu-Gi-Oh! Players to have like some portion of their game plan, you know, inaccessible. But over the last couple of years, I have pretty much gone in the exact opposite direction. I think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just a
He's gotten Mystic Mind one time too often.
different kind of game than Magic. I will say I like Nadir's stance that like maybe there's some floodgates that restrict part of your opponent's movement, but not all of it. The one experience I had with as few floodgates as possible was Trinity, in which they took this like huge hardline stance against it in their custom format and banned everything that could even be remotely construed as a floodgate. They were out here like banning poisonous winds, and I have to tell you, it was great. Like, I legitimately think pretty much anything that could remotely be construed a floodgate could be removed from Yu-Gi-Oh! Tomorrow. The game would be in a much better place. And I think you can go even further down the line. I think cards like the Arrival Cybers Atagnister could be considered floodgates as well. That's like a perfect world that I know will never happen. With regard to Kevin's point about like, oh, it's there so that new players can scum wins off better players, there's already a built-in mechanism for that in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's called variance. You draw 5 random cards at the start of your turn, and sometimes you're gonna like spike the one of versus Jesse Cotton.
It's not enough. That's not enough. Like, variance is not big enough in Yu-Gi-Oh! Without floodgates. Depending on the format, of course. Depending on the format. But in a hypothetical world that he's describing right now, if we take out all the floodgates, casual / not very good players, there's not enough variance. I'm sorry to inform you, but there is not enough variance for that to happen like often. The game is very, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very good game in terms of the better player will very often win a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And variance happens, but especially because we're playing best of threes, it's not gonna happen very often.
And I don't think as a new player you feel good because you beat a pro because you flipped up Teekboo. It feels like you drew Teekboo and Teekboo did all the work. You know, it's not like you even really played Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't think that type of gameplay is alluring.
This is somewhat reasonable, but I'm sure this is like differentiated by other people. Like, I don't think this is true. Like, people feel good if they win, period.
New people, even if they walk with a W.
I'm not sure if that was an argument or a hashtag ad for Magic. What do you guys think?
I get his argument.
Wizards on the payroll here?
I can't wait for this to circle right back to me so I can argue these points, but proceed.
Well, okay, my take. I think floodgates, they've obviously been around since like Yu-Gi-Oh's start.
I need to get ready for the gauge take. Okay.
Right? Magician's Force, we saw even Rivalry of the Warlords. But as the game's like progressively gotten more complex, they've really proven to be like a point of contention. Now we have cards like just do so much that are just printed on a card, but it's still like range true that sometimes less is more. Like imagine just blanking one mechanic of the game and it just ruining your entire strategy. And a lot of the times, like printing cards in the future here, floodgates, it's like disastrous. Nadir, don't you have
Nicholas Vera and Juan27, thank you for the primes, appreciate you. And Nicholas for the actual sub, appreciate that, thank you.
Have like a list of banned cards and like more than half of them are just banned because of like certain floodgate effects?
75% of the banned extra deck cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Either tutor from the main deck or impede your opponent from activating.
Oh, not this
cards
speech
and playing
again.
the game.
That's two completely different things, though.
No, those are two
Yeah,
different
I
things,
know.
but still, like that's
But yeah,
a large.
Nadir is very proud of that theory of the extra deck monsters that tutor. You know, he brings it up like every time. Like even when it's like about floodgates, he's like, but did you know almost every banned extra deck monster is there because it tutors from the main deck?
Portion, and I'm sure
It's not wrong. It's a good take.
rings true to like the rest of the ban list. So you just
do
look
with
at
that
generic
information what
cards,
you
too.
will,
Like,
but
most floodgates are just like they're banned for a reason. They're really good. We've even had 2 of them just recently. Barrier Statue and Scythe are banned now. Floodgate effects. So we have these like great skillful formats, And then like these formats can sometimes be watered down just by floodgates existing. Like if you think like Zodiac format, Dimensional Barrier was...
The problem is basically about this whole argument of like, oh, but it lets the bad players beat the good players sometimes, and that's good. I think that's true. I think that is 100% true. I think even though it, of course, me as usually in the position of a better player, without trying to sound cocky, but you know, but like for me, I prefer if floodgates were gone, right? But I do think it is important for the Yu-Gi-Oh as a game that the bad players or like the casual players, or without trying to be insulting, that they have a decent chance of winning the games, because otherwise they're not going to keep playing. And honestly, the game is nothing without the casuals. The game is nothing without the casuals, because like the game doesn't live off of me, off of the competitive players, the 1,000 people at a YCS that are like, that consider themselves like good players, or like maybe even less than that, right? And so asking Konami to basically streamline the game for like us as like the competitive player base, if we are not responsible for the game's success, which we are not, right? We are basically just like the tournaments, the YCSs are just like basically advertising for the game to advertise it to the casuals, right? Sitting at home, watching the tournament, being like, hey, I want to be there one day maybe, so I'm going to play the game at home and with my friends and at locals and buy product, right? And those are the ones that, like, of course, casuals buy product as well, like, but they are not the majority, right? And so I think it is fair that you give those people a reason to play the game, because you have no reason to play a game you can't win against like anyone that has played it for longer than you. And because Yu-Gi-Oh in its base form is a very good card game, because it is that. It is a very good card game where, in a nutshell, like the better player will almost always win. There's not that much variance in Yu-Gi-Oh actually. It's there, but there's not that much. Like it turns from format to format, but usually these days decks are super consistent and will have their lines almost always available. And so like if a good player plays a complex deck that is consistent, you'll almost never beat him without the help of like super high rolling or floodgates, right? And so like that's the thing. These players should win. The problem for competitive Yu-Gi-Oh is that it doesn't only apply to that dynamic of like bad player against good player, because overall, even though a bad player has a floodgate in their deck, they are still not favored to beat a good player, right? It's like, I can beat this player if I draw skill drain. Well, your chance to draw skill drain is like 33%, and then I could still draw like evenly matched cosmic or whatever. You're still not favored, right? This is why Flunder never won an event, because at the end of the day, like, you're not favored against good players. It doesn't work like that, right? But so like overall, I don't have a problem with like not very good players or like casual players having a floodgate every once in a while, because we play best of threes. I can side for floodgate decks. Like, it's annoying that I have to do that, but I will typically still win. The problem is that these cards are also available to everyone else, right? These cards are also available to good players. And that's scary when you enter a tournament. Going 1-1, like playing a best of three, you win the first game, you lose the second game, or the other way around against a good player, and you know that they can go first and just scythe lock you or skill drain you or whatever. That is not very good, and that's also where, honestly, in my opinion, it's like the saddest experience is like when a game that could otherwise be a really, really good game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Be taken away by a floodgate, right? That's what annoys me personally, is when I'm going like head to head with someone who's also a good player, and then game 3 or whatever gets decided by a floodgate. Yeah, because like I'm not too worried about like someone who isn't as good because they have a floodgate in their deck. Of course, it feels bad that you could maybe lose to someone who isn't as good, but I'm also not very looking forward to anyone who is like just not very good at the game and they don't have a floodgate. It's like also not really, we're playing non-games at that point, basically. Like if I play against someone who needs a floodgate to beat me, and then there's no floodgates, Like, of course, I'm gonna win, and that's gonna feel good, but it's not gonna be like, you know, like we're not playing an interactive game anyways. You know what I mean? So I think so. Basically, the take is weird, but I think Floodgates in the hands of casual / not very good players are okay because they give them a reason to keep playing the game and have a chance at winning. And I believe that anyone should have a chance at winning at a card game. It should never be like chess where the better player pretty much always wins, because we're playing a card game. There should be variance. In the like overall, I still hate Floodgates, but I understand why it's fine if I think it's fine if not very good players have them.
Miserable to play against people that go back on that format.
Terrible.
They try to play that format without D barrier to make it more fun. And like
Enjoy
Necros,
that this format, by the way, too.
Necros with Jin is another one that just comes to mind with that. Miserable, right? And I think like
Jin was the same thing, basically. In Necros, and let me take you on a trip down memory lane. Necros format with Jin. I don't remember a single time that I would lose to someone I would consider a bad Necros player because of Jin lock. It never happened. It would maybe happen 1 out of 3 games that they would Jin lock me and I wouldn't have an out. But you played enough outs to reasonably have one, like 2 out of 3 games, or like the 1 out of 2 games when you go second. The way it would usually go is I would get Jin locked once by a bad player, maybe lose to it, but then I would win the other 2 games. Against good player, against bad player, it almost never mattered, Jin lock. When Jin lock was the most scary was when it was 2 good players against each other, because then like it would take all the skill out of the game that would usually matter, and just like, you know, like, for example, I lost German Nationals finals in 2015 to Jinlock by Alpai, because we had 2 games where 2 good games, right? 2 normal games, I think. So it was 1-1, and then I got Jinlocked and I lost, and that felt very bad. I lost in top 16 of YCS Bochum to Federico Supini back then because of Jinlock in a game that could have otherwise been a very good game as well. I don't remember a single time losing to a not very good player because of Jinlock. That didn't happen. It didn't happen because it would just not happen 2 out of 3 games.
Like Yu-Gi-Oh's a game that like
Vanity's Emptiness from Billy. Yeah, same thing. Different format, but same thing.
thrives on its complexity, right? Like it's really.
Can you explain Jin? Jin was a card that is still banned to this day. It's like a level 3 fiend monster that if you use it as a material for a ritual summon, as long as that ritual monster is on the field, your opponent cannot special summon. And you could search that card with like Lavalval Chain or Armageddon Knight in Necros and put up a ritual monster that would make your opponent unable to special summon, basically.
Thrilling to watch somebody like break through a tier element board that's multiple disruptions, maybe just not like sitting on a floodgate type effect. And I think it's just been proven by the ban list and how little floodgates actually get released today, or how bad they are when they are. Like see Mystic Mine recently. It's just not a great way to like approach card design. And I think like Konami
and I agree with that too. I agree with that too. I think overall my closing statement. It's not going to be the closing statement, but like my conclusion is still floodgates are a bad thing for the game overall. But that one argument of giving hope to not so good players, I think is a very good argument, and I think that's literally why that is single-handedly, in my opinion, the reason why they make them and why they are still around, is because they want to keep the casual player base in there, because that's what's paying, like that's the majority that's paying for the game. That's what's making the majority of money for them.
From printing more floodgates.
They are not acting in the interest of the competitive players in this.
All right, go for it.
I'm gonna immediately go for Kevin, actually, bro. Kevin, I'm sure your argument might be legit, but it is that is the dumbest crutch I've ever heard, bro.
I want to explain. Just to be clear, like I'm not out here saying floodgates are good for the game. If you ask me, floodgates are bad for the game. The question was though, do floodgates have a place in Yu-Gi-Oh? And if I was to place them anywhere, I would place them there. The one thing that I will say...
Why do you think casuals enjoy them so much? I don't... Like, the thing is, I'm just guessing, basically, is the honest answer from the responses that I get very often. Like, whenever we talk about floodgates in any YouTube video or on stream, I always get comments like, oh, but if like all the top decks have these broken end boards, I should also have this or that floodgate available to beat this. How can I beat all these decks that summon so many times and do so many things without having a card like this, right? And I think that is literally what it is, right? It's like people enjoy floodgates because they give them a way to win at the game without having to, you know, perform incredible combos or know every single card in the game. They just like to take the simple route to winning a couple games of Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, they're not going to have great success with it, but that doesn't matter, because at least instead of going like 0-5 at a locals that you go to every other week, maybe, you go like 2-3, and that feels different. Even though it's still not a great record or a winning record or whatever, it's different than going 0-5, never having a chance to win because your deck is just like strictly worse than the other players' decks, and you are also like not as good of a player because you don't play as often.
Joseph pointed out is if a newer player beats a pro player or like a less skilled player beats a pro player by flipping Tikaboo, they don't feel good about it. That is 100% wrong. If you look at... So the one thing that I will say, when it comes to casual players specifically, a lot of times they will absolutely hate FTKs. They will love lockdown strategies. You make a deck and you post like a Yugioh Pro replay video on YouTube tomorrow that summons Last Warrior from Another Planet, flip Anti-Spell, flip Mask of Restrict, flip Royal Decree, and all this stuff. Casuals eat that shit up. They love it. These floodgates that are in the game, from a competitive point of view, absolutely awful. But for people that are not super competitive but sometimes want to like go to locals or something like that and don't win more often than not, a lot of times they'll resort to some form of stun strategy and will see more success with that stun strategy.
It's not even like people only win with floodgates. It doesn't even have to be that. But you can play like quote unquote bad deck, or you can play a deck relatively badly. You will still win games without floodgates sometimes, not as often, right? You can still play like your rogue deck, and of course it will not go undefeated in a tournament, but maybe you'll still win a couple rounds. And then you combine that with a couple floodgates, then suddenly you have a deck that can go like maybe like in 6 or 7 rounds, you can go like 3-3 or 4-3, and that's enough for them. For some people, right? For people that are like, oh, I don't have the time to really put into it, and like, you know, you can play decks that you just like. Yeah, pet decks. You can play like a deck that you like, pair it with a floodgate. Sometimes your deck is good enough on its own, not very often. Sometimes you need the floodgates. Sometimes you still lose. But overall, you have like an experience that isn't just losing, right? Or always uphill battle every single time. And I absolutely despise the mechanic of floodgates. But for that singular purpose, if the question is, do floodgates have a place in Yu-Gi-Oh? I think that specifically is the place. In competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, like high competitive level, they should not have a place, period. That's my answer. High competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, they should not have one. They should not exist.
Than they see when they're playing their normal regular deck, and from that position they'll be like, okay, I'm getting more wins, therefore I am having more fun.
I don't think that's right
I
though.
really
Like
don't
I really don't
believe
think
that.
that's
It
right. Like the
absolutely
cards.
I think-
No,
no,
these
I think
floodgates.
You know what? The imposter is Gauge or MBT, I think. The thing is, it could be Coder, because I know Coder. Like, the reason why I think it could be Coder, even though I agree with his take to a good extent, is that I also think Coder usually is very, very he hates things with a passion very often, like Max C or whatever. And I'm not sure, I don't actually know Kevin's true opinion on this, right? And if he's like, if his real opinion is I hate floodgates, I don't care what you say, nothing will change my mind, then I don't agree with his personal take, but I think he could be the imposter, but I think his take is reasonable. The reason why I think it could be Gage is because Gage's take is actually reasonable this time. So I think based off of that, it just has to be Gage, right? Because Gage just sets some things that actually made sense. So, like, it's just Gage, I think.
Best example of
hold on,
that is,
wait.
you guys ever had someone disconnect against you in Macedon? Do you think to yourself, oh, I wish we got a good little back and forth? I'm like, we take those, baby, easy, clap, dude, he DC'd.
Well, I think what you're misconstruing is, I think the like cat with a mustache style meme tubers making videos about how they've locked every zone, and like people who want to play Yu-Gi-Oh but feel outclassed are two different kind of people.
No, Joseph. Okay,
Like,
I just feel like these cards.
Did you guys?
Wait, Kevin, okay, everybody else talk. Let me talk for a second. Okay,
Okay,
I know I'm at the end of the line, but I literally can't get a word in, bro. It hurts. I think your argument for saying like people get more, these casuals get more enjoyment out of it is like frankly ridiculous. Like these cards, these floodgates aren't sexy. They don't feel exciting to play. Like they don't really feel like they do anything like flashy. I feel like that's just a very dumb way to
Gage,
defend.
do you
like,
have
why
a Mystic
floodgates
Mind
should
player
exist.
at your locals when it was legal? Did you have a Mystic Mind Burn player at your locals?
Sure, but
If
I
you-
swear
no,
that
no,
guy
hold up,
hated every
hold up,
time he sat
hold
down
up.
and played,
Okay,
bro.
yes, you hated it. You had a Mystic
No,
Mind
he
Burn.
did.
Listen,
Bro, he was
listen.
insane
Gage,
miserable.
He hates himself.
The
Listen
guy
to
would
me.
literally, sit there and say, "I don't know what your deck."
That's cap. That's cap. Mystic Mind Burn players were proud of that shit. There was not a single person in the world who was like, hey, I hate what I'm doing to you right now, but I can't win otherwise, so I'm sorry, here's my Mystic Mind. Nah. They were all freaking creatures, dude. That Gage is an imposter.
Does just play.
Okay,
and then
Gage,
he
here
would
is
go to
my-
him and he
I
would
have
activate
a follow-up
mine.
question. That Mystic Mind Burn player at your locals, give him the best deck of the format. Do you think he performs as well as half the other people in the room?
No, and like I
Well,
think
that's
any
your
player,
answer. You
well,
have
I
your
think
answer
no,
right there.
but I don't think that makes him have more fun. I think any
but
player
that's
worth
not-
their salt would
that's
be
not
like,
the
damn,
question. That is not
maybe
the
let me
question.
learn and get better. I think
Gage,
that's
The
where enjoyment of
argument, the
game
argument
comes
I'm
Hey, Josh acting like he didn't discover Beat Cop Mystic Mind.
making
you
is that
think-
it
do you
gives a
think
crutch
it
to
has-
less good players.
We don't
so
talk about
they
that.
can win against better players.
Okay, Gage, do you think?
And
that
I'll say one
floodgates have
thing.
no-
I will say one thing. I was proud of that. Whenever I won a game with that at Euros with Mystic Mind Beat Cop, I was proud of that. Not because of there was no gameplay, but because that was a GigaChad idea. That was a Pog idea. I felt good every time I looked my opponent in the eye and I was like, you lost. And they were like, yeah, I lost. The gameplay wasn't very good, but the deck building idea behind it was freaking genius. Sometimes deck building just pays off, dude. Sometimes deck building paid off. I looked at every single tournament player that day, and I was like, I know exactly how you built your deck, and I exploited it in my deck building, so I win. And I
Chris,
was
what's
very
over in the
proud
game?
of
Is
that.
What you're saying?
Do I think that? No, I think like if you go back to yours where you say when in moderation, when they're actually released with like proper testing, I think they're fine. But it's proven recently that they're just not capable of actually releasing a floodgate that's not like detrimental to the game.
I do want to prod Nadir a little bit on that. You said like there exists some floodgates that like kind of restrict that, but are like okay. What are those?
Well, like there's some decks that can play around some floodgates, in the sense that they are hurt by them, but they'll play them anyway. So best example recently would be like Shifter and Sprite. Skill Drain is a very popular one in like graveyard decks.
But do you think that cards like Shifter and Skill Drain are like fine?
No, I don't think they're fine. But I understand that sometimes they're not as egregious depending on what deck you're playing.
The problem about this, it is true that like, well, okay, not every deck loses to Skill Drain. Not every deck loses to Rivalry. Not every deck loses to Gozen Match. The problem is we have so many these days that for every given format, you can find one. Right? For every given deck, there's going to be a floodgate that beats it. For every deck, there's going to be a floodgate. Now, if we only had, let's say, Skill Drain, like a very, very abstract example. if we only had skill drain, it's the only floodgate in the game, right? Some decks would play that, and then you would just look at your deck and be like, does my deck lose to skill drain? Yeah, so I probably need an answer to that. So I play something. I don't know what you would play, but I play some out to skill drain, and I'm happy with it, you know? Whereas now it's like you can just you can never be safe because every deck is like vulnerable to floodgates in some shape or form.
I have one question. So Joseph and Gage, you guys are in the camp of they do not have a place in the game at all, yeah?
I am, for sure.
I think I also am, just saying.
Okay, then I want to ask you guys your opinion on a card like Zombie World. Would you guys go as far as to say Zombie World doesn't have a place in this game? Because it is a floodgate, but is Zombie World a card that in a world where you ban all floodgates, you would want to see this card banned as well?
I'm a hater. Yeah. I think that Zombie World has been the focus of these extremely unfun non-games in, I guess, branded specifically. Tierlement plays it occasionally. I get the zombie deck needs it. Sorry. Like, I apologize that Konami made your whole deck center around a floodgate, but, like, we banned Mystic Mind Burn from people.
If we're going to the extremity of saying, like, yeah, ban all floodgates, for sure.
Invader CGC, thank you for the 5 months.
Like, anything that's a floodgate effect, it's too much.
Yep, I agree. I concur.
So to be fair, I don't completely disagree with that either. I just wanted to like kind of get your opinion on that because I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea who's lying here. No fucking clue.
I'm lost.
I
as well.
don't either. I feel like it's got to be Kevin. I feel like you put a little too much thought into it.
I am not. I just wanted to like kind of give the like kind of like not the devil's advocate point of view, but like if we're asking, do floodgates have a place at Yu-Gi-Oh? I kind of like dug in my head and was like, well, they surely have a place somewhere, otherwise they would have never been created.
Gage, what was yours?
My take was the same as yours, Joseph, where it's like they just shouldn't belong. They just can't seem to print a floodgate that's not extremely detrimental to whatever the game is at the moment.
I mean, I gotta guess.
It's Gage.
I got one too.
What I'll say, Kevin, is who do you think it is?
I was gonna say I think it's Joseph because I have never seen Gage so much as play a floodgate with the exception of like Naturia Rose Whip, which was like a part of like a full combo, so it's like not the same.
Yeah.
Joseph played Flu. So, like, he's probably mourning the loss of Barrier Statue as we speak, bro.
But ask yourself this. How many times did I go to bat for Flu as a competent strategy without Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds? I was constantly talking up how you can make boards even without that card.
That's fair, but you also have played Phantasm Spiral.
Did you play it, though?
Lives and dies by Tikaboo's skill drain and protecting it with Sea Stealth attack, so...
I think I have a guess. You all want to just throw some shit at the wall and see what sticks?
I've had mine written down for it.
Gage wrote my name down and he's like, I'm not even listening to the rest of this conversation. Okay, let me grab my piece of paper because I forgot to grab it again. Give me a second.
Gonna make it a habit to write it on your hand like me.
So do you go wash it off afterwards?
Yeah, and then, but like it's like ink, so it doesn't go off really instantly after I have to wash my hands like over multiple days. So I just walk around with like Gage's name in my hand all the time.
You have to jerk off and you look down at your penis and see Kevin.
I have returned.
Everybody ready? 3, 2, 1.
It was me. I'm the imposter.
Oh! What?
Yeah.
I told you.
So give me a second to defend. I'm really glad you
I
guys...
told you.
Wait, who'd
I'm
y'all
really glad
write?
you guys-
Who'd y'all write?
I wrote you.
I wrote you too.
I wrote Farfa.
Me?
Is that the first one where...
one yet?
That's the first
Nobody
one.
got it right?
Nobody
Did
got.
nobody get it
I
right?
did not think it was Gage. I was torn between Farfa and Joseph the entire time.
How was that
So
not
if you could-
obvious? That was the most obvious one for sure. I think it's literally as simple as if Gage has a reasonable take, it's Gage.
Give me a sec to like defend. I'm
Of
glad you guys
course,
did a lot of the
Gage
talking,
thinks
right?
it's
Like
Yeah.
because like you guys push the extremities of it. Because like I agree with like the deer, like where the cards if they're released like with careful consideration, like it's fine. The one thing that you guys didn't bring up that I really thought would be a pusher is like Master Duel. I think in a best of 1 scenario, it's completely different. I'd be viscerally against it as well. But like in a best of 3 scenario, I think that just like involves a different level of deck building and consideration.
Just draw the
for not
out,
having
huh?
spell. I mean, I think also decks that are more flexible and are able to handle it are the decks that do rise to the top. And if your deck does crumble to a single like floodgate, well, that's just like the sufficiencies of your deck. Like
Okay.
I did.
Tierlement players in shambles because they lose to Necro Valley. Tierlement was never the best deck.
there.
No,
That's your
I
fault.
did
Now you know
not
it.
think it was Gage at all. I'm actually in shock.
Nah,
Kevin,
the
if you
cards
weren't
actually
the imposter, why did you bother playing at Devil's Advocate? Why would you do that? Like,
Well, because
that's something an imposter would do.
Because I figured the way the conversation would go would literally be just like, yeah, I hate floodgates. Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. And it'd be like, okay, so why do we hate floodgates? And we just sit around in a circle, jerking each other off about why we hate floodgates. Like
You
I was
will
like,
do that any other episode, though. You'll do that any other episode. There'll be one bozo sitting there like, man, if I say this one wild take, weird. It's like everybody knows.
Wait, the arguing part or the jerking off part?
Bye-bye.
Outro time?
Outro time.
Okay.
Oh, Biden blast
All
is the
right.
outro. Biden blast.
God damn. These are great. I like these. My God. Hey, I mean, I think now closing statement. Overall, I think still floodgates are not very good for the competitive game. If you are trying to sit down and have a good game of Yu-Gi-Oh, floodgates absolutely do not help that. And I would personally be very happy if they did remove floodgates, or if they at least hit them on the ban list a little bit, right? Not have every single one of them at 3, right? Like, if your deck loses to, like, maybe your deck loses to skill drain, but your deck doesn't care about goes in match and doesn't care about rivalry or whatever. So I think it would already be like, it would already be helpful if the cards were like limited or semi-limited. Of course, I would personally prefer them to see them banned, but I will take them at 1 or 2 rather than 3. Like, I think that could potentially be a solution where we can meet in the middle, right? Because some people really think they need floodgates, some people want floodgates. So maybe it's like, maybe that's the where we meet in the middle, is like have them be okay. I enabled the Biden blast now. You can chill. We have Biden blast now. Okay. I think it's fine if they hit them at 1 or 2 as a thing. Does it work already, or do I need to refresh it? It's fine. It'll be there next time. It works in your chat. It's just not on the screen, but it's fine. It'll be there next time. I'd have to, like, hold up. Yeah. Anyways, that was fun. I think Kevin's take was reasonable. I still overall think it'd be a better game. Basically, no, okay. My closing statement is the game would be a better game without floodgates, period. But the better game might actually sell less cards than the game we have right now, because it appeals to more players, right? Sometimes the better game doesn't always appeal to the majority of people. Sometimes a game that is slightly worse appeals to more people because it is easier to win at it. You know what I mean? And I think that's the problem with floodgates. I think that's why we have them, is because the game is worse than it could be, but it appeals to more players that way. And that's sad in a way, but that's, I think, what it is. All right, closing statements done.